University, to His Excellency Foreign Minister Klimkin, Pavlo Klimkin, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. I welcome you warmly to Princeton University in the name of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, in the name of the Princeton Institute of International and Regional Studies, and in the name of the program on European, East European, and East Asian studies. And we were all mobilized together by the Liechtenstein Institute, which I have fondly run since 20 years here at the university. I have met then Ambassador Pavlo Klimkin in Berlin in March, in a, I think for both of us, unforgettable evening where we discussed the ramifications of the situation in Crimea. And anybody of you who has ever looked at an atlas or the map might realize that the distance between Kiev and Berlin is considerably shorter than between Kiev and Washington. It feels it's close. It feels particularly it's close if I go to my old native grounds in Vienna. As we mentioned before, I never expected that I would have you join me in listening to the Ukrainian foreign minister in a time when we face the beginning of the end of the Europe as we have known it for at least since 1975. Why? We had the Helsinki Peace Accords in 1975. We had the Charter of Paris in 1990. And yes, of course, we had the Charter of the United Nations, where one famous Princetonian, namely Senator Claiborne Pell, repeatedly ran around with the blue book, and also here in some of my lectures, in this room actually. And it seems for Europe, all these documents have been violated. Territory has been infringed upon by tanks from the outside. Territory has been annexed by force from the outside. Pavlo Klimkin is uniquely qualified for his current position because, amongst other things, he studied physics and technology in the Department of Astrophysics and Space Research at the Moscow Institute, and he did so prior to 1994, namely prior to the Budapest Agreement, when the Ukraine voluntarily relinquished more than 4,000 nuclear weapons. And we couldn't resist but to ask the foreign minister before how they feel about this now. After these studies, he joined the National Academy of Sciences of the Ukraine in the Pattern Welding Institute, and he entered in 1993 the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine. He worked to various positions, but what is very important that already in 1997, he served in the Embassy of Berlin after he served in the Directorate General for Arms Control and Disarmament, where he was a member from 93 to 97. So this whole Budapest Agreement, and as we discussed before, the whole discussion around MBFR, the Multiple Balanced Force Reduction talks of Europe, fell on his desk. Once he came back from Berlin in 2000, he was in the Department of Economic Cooperation and then he became in that department the head of the division. For me, very importantly, and for him, certainly importantly, in the last, considering the political events in the last 24 hours, Minister Klimkin served for 4 years in London as a minister counselor at the Embassy of Ukraine, and part of his portfolio was to deal with Scotland. Now, today, he is the foreign minister of the largest contiguous country of Europe, of the country with the largest accumulation of the best agricultural earth, and of a country which has a significant amount of economic, defense industrial, and mining prowess in the east of that country, and of a country which faces, and this is really terrible for a European to say about another European country, nearly existential threats. So it is with a certain eagerness, sir, that we listen to your words, and on the behest of Princeton University and the Liechtenstein Institute, I'm delighted to welcome you to the table here. Please help me welcome Mr. Klimkin.
Well, as I'm actually a physicist myself by education, I could start with saying, dear colleagues, dear friends, it's indeed an honor and a pleasure for me to be here today, to speak in front of you. And I'm really grateful for this kind invitation to be here in Princeton. So it's indeed a sort of special moment for me. Speaking about Ukraine, speaking about developments in recent months and years, it's indeed a challenge. So let me concentrate on probably shaping up my short presentation around 3 very simple questions. 3 W questions. First, what actually happened in Ukraine over the last 10 months? Why you did not have Ukraine on your TV screens for years, and over the recent months, probably every other hour, you have a different picture from Ukraine, a very disturbing picture. Second, why actually the crisis really touches the core of American values and American interests, which is not obvious for many of my American colleagues and friends. And third, why it's unlike any other crisis of the last decades, and why the West, please allow me to operate with such notions, why the West cannot afford simply sit it down. So the first point, indeed, what happened? As you probably know, the crisis started in 2013, when Ukraine became the field of a sort of tug of war between the customs union or Eurasian Union, as Russia would like it to develop further on the one side, and the transatlantic world or the European Union on the other side. The then President Yanukovych was so-called raising the stakes, promising then in November he will sign the association agreement with the EU, which is also a personal point for me. I was chief negotiator for their association agreement. Indeed, not just an agreement, but the agreement for Ukraine, because it means not just free trade area, not just in-depth sectoral cooperation, but indeed is civilizational choice for all Ukrainians. Vilnius summit, late November, was expected as a point of no return by many Ukrainians, by actually millions of Ukrainians. But he decided to pull back, and causing, of course, a major unrest in the whole country. Thousands and thousands of people who were totally disillusioned about this decision took to Kyiv Central Square, Maidan, which is now really a notion for standing for freedom. They stood there for 3 long months, enduring the winter cold, police brutality, and harassment of the state-controlled mass media. At a certain point, the protests spilled over into a kind of violent process against the riot police. It culminated on February 18th, claiming over 100 lives, mostly protesters shot by snipers. On February 2021, Yanukovych fled the country to Russia without formally fulfilling his obligation under important agreement on political settlement. Why I'm trying to tell you the story? Probably you had been following on that on your TV screens. Just to give you a flavor how it all started, with the important point to break the most important promise for all Ukrainians, the promise of open up the way to Europe, to the European Union, to open up the way for European vocation, for a real dream for every Ukrainian. After that came indeed a black day for Ukrainians, for Ukraine, and I believe for the whole civilized world. On March 18th, the Crimea has been annexed by Russia, occupied in a very mean way, putting Russian troops without any labels, without any tax, into the Crimea, starting the new kind of war, breaking any sort of legal or political obligation. So the global system of checks and balances has been totally ruined. We live in a rule-based world. We live in a world where for every country, the system of checks and balances is critically important. It's about a network where we have the feeling of security and safety because of a network of legally binding and political commitments. But every sort of such commitment has been broken. In 1994, we joined the START I Treaty, also signing the Budapest Memorandum. The memorandum signed by all nuclear powers, giving us a guarantee on our sovereignty, on our independence, and on our inviolability of borders. We had the third largest nuclear arsenal inherited from the Soviet Union. We were ready, and we agreed to give it up, getting as a reimbursement clear political commitment, getting the Budapest Memorandum signed, because we had the trust, we had confidence in the international system, in the system of check and balances, in the system where political and legally binding commitments have to be lived up. Where we are now, Putin addressed the Russian parliament celebrating Crimea's return home. Right afterwards, he brought in circulation the term Novorossiya, New Russia, a sort of Russia's lingo for eastern and southern parts of Ukraine along the Black Sea and Azov Sea coast. It was still nothing happening in Donetsk and Lugansk. It was all quiet. But on May 11th, the Lugansk and Donetsk terrorists conducting a number of locations, so-called referendum in independence. A couple of days before, they started a real unrest there. In what way? With the clear assistance of Russian troops, getting Russian weapons and heavy weaponry across the border, getting mercenaries and money. So it was the second attack on Ukraine. And it's exactly the point you got the TV footage on what is going on there. So it was the very moment when Russia decided to send its regular troops. It was Independence Day of Ukraine. So broken every sort of legal and political commitment. We have been fighting for our independence, for our sovereignty, on the basis of what we had. The militaries, Ukrainian military is destroyed, but now coming back on scene with great combat spirit, ready to defend Ukrainian independence, the whole country totally enthusiastic on our way forward. I've never seen in all years of independence and 23 years in independence, the readiness of all Ukrainians to sacrifice the most important, what they have, to sacrifice their presence for their future. And the principal point, why we are punished, why we have Russian troops on our territory, why we have the terrorists taking hostages, killing people, shutting down Malaysian airplane with Russian anti-air missile, killing diplomats and honorary consuls. Why it's all coming to Ukraine? Because we are punished for our European choice, for our readiness and our commitment to European values, for our readiness to sign the association agreement and to have make or break point with the Soviet past. It was a very difficult time for Ukraine, 23 years of independence. The time of one generation, the time when we took over from a purely post-Soviet or Soviet country to the country where 80% of Ukrainians are striving for the membership in European Union. For the country in which just a couple of years ago we had, according to every opinion poll, just 16% supporting future membership in NATO. Now, just yesterday, I got the newest message from Kiev about exactly 50%, every second Ukrainian, supporting the way to the NATO. And it's exactly transforming not just mentality, but also Ukrainian way of thinking. Clear commitment to transatlantic and European values, and the idea that everyone is ready, every Ukrainian is ready to sacrifice something for our European way. And it's indeed unique in our nation history. So for us, I'll say it probably from a different perspective. Negotiating a settlement in Donetsk and Lugansk, and for us, it's about settlement. It's about uniting the country. It's about a clear red line. It is just the only red line which matters for me. To have united, democratic, and European Ukraine. Not to have regions, Ukrainian regions, under Russian control, trying to impose veto, or the kind of veto, on our decisions, on how to define our security, on how to define our European way, and how to live in a country where we have clear commitment to European values, but also stay united, not to allow Russian-backed terrorists to stir up the people who are in no way and in no mood to join Russia or to become a quasi-independent entity like Transnistria or Abkhazia, who are not willing, to go the way of a kind of autocracy. And it's exactly the way coming to the second question, the second W question. Why it's really an America's problem? And let me clarify this point. It's not as much America's problem as probably America's defining moment. It does define who you want to be for the world and what role to play. In this globalized world, having a clear idea what kind of world we all would like to live in. And I actually like the fact that no one within America's elite questions whether the US has a leading role to play. No way. Of course it has, and it's in the nature of things. The question is actually how to lead. Up front, from behind, or from within, It's the very famous Tom Friedman concept of America's getting itself and the world of the needle of the oil extracting countries. And it's exactly the development now with the shale and oil gas. But my preferred answer would be America's leadership must be strong and unshakable. And it's America's decision what to do next. One should be aware that today's attack on Ukraine is not only about Ukraine. It's not only about Europe. It's about principle. It's about whether we could allow and whether we could afford breaking every sort of legally binding and political commitments. And if we are in a mood to allow someone to break it, why should other countries, like nations like Iran or other nations, why should they have any sort of confidence and trust in any sort of decisions? Why, if the European nations like Ukraine is under attack and we can get back with all the toolbox of the civilized world, why we can back to the status quo? Why if we can defend someone's sovereignty and independence, why should we have confidence in the world we live in? And of course, geopolitically, we are in the uncharted waters now. It's clear. Too many taboos have been broken, and we need to define a way forward. And for this way, we need clear leadership, and it should be, of course, clear leadership from the US. The EU is able to speak now with one voice. 28 countries trying to keep pressure on Russia, but also concerted with the United States as a real leader, clearly understanding what it's all about. And it's exactly the way forward. It's exactly the defining moment here for the new world, new globalized world we need to see as a future model for our security and for your security. And it gets me to my third question. Why can't America afford to sit it out, this time around? And of course, there is a fatigue here also in the US about being engaged in different conflicts, because US mastered in a very good way amazing challenges, Afghanistan, Iraq, and I mean it, and the present development on ISIS actually show that the most difficult challenges which have been mastered are now on a different level. They are not, disappearing, but we together are ready to take it in, understanding that also Ukraine is very different from Iraq or Afghanistan. In what way? Because many of my colleagues and friends simply don't get it. They see Ukraine as just another, crisis, conflict development, military offensive. Why Ukraine is different? Because in Ukraine, it's not about building democracy. We are a democratic country. It's about our history. It's about our vocation. It's about European mentality. It's about Ukraine having the point of no return and living ultimately the post-Soviet space. And for any of you, it should be clear, it's the end of Cold War or post-Cold War development as you live it through. The Cold War is not over. It's exactly the last phase of that in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia. And if we can't master this challenge together, having a clear pattern of democratic world coming together, a kind of post-war development, which is now coming to an end, having the all democratic countries coming together and be able to stand for new challenges. We are just missing the point of understanding what it's all about. And if Ukraine is not helped and assisted now in her fight for democracy, freedom, and independence, it would lead to a sort of different perception throughout Europe and throughout the world. It would put a real question for the leadership. Who is the leader of the democratic world now? And it would enable someone who is still dreaming about dividing lines, about walls, about trying to restrict himself in a world without values and without clear democratic principles. It would allow someone to get to a kind of frozen conflict. You know, Russia is perfectly able to, to create problems. Transnistria, Karabakh, it could be another one, a real one in Donetsk and Lugansk. And not to fix the problem, but to live with the problems and to put these challenges for other ones. But it's our common way how to meet this challenge and how to understand what is the way forward. And what we need now is just political solidarity. It's a real assistance for Ukrainian reforms. And of course, the whole transatlantic world speaking with one voice for Ukraine sovereignty and independence. And on the basis of that, we will be perfectly able to defend ourselves. So let me stop here, probably outlining the key idea for the future as Ukraine, for the future of Ukraine as a real member of Europe, European Union, and transatlantic community. So the signing, one sign, of the association agreement has led us to the developments which should help us to wrap up the whole European project, which would get us to Europe as fully free, democratic, united, and stable, and would lead us to a completely different notion in the modern world. And it's exactly the way forward for every one of us. And I came here after the yesterday's visit of our president to Washington. Indeed, the unique moment, also for myself. So this week is a kind of make or break point for Ukraine. We ratified the association agreement as a kind of point of no return. Our president held a speech in front of both chambers, talking about freedom, talking about our unique partnership, and raising the point of real solidarity. And, sitting in the parliament, it was sitting in Ukrainian parliament and presenting the association agreement for ratification for Ukrainian parliament, it was a unique experience for me, a kind of personal one. after negotiating the agreement for 4.5 years. And sitting here on the hill, listening to the president and talking to my friends in the Senate and Congress, feeling the solidarity after preparing this visit was a unique experience also for me personally. And it's indeed feeling with friends, partners, and allies. And Ukraine will be not just a real asset in a kind of diplomatic terminology, but a real ally for the US, for Europe. We will stand together to our values and to our interests for the free and democratic world. Many thanks for your attention, and it was great to see such a great crowd on Friday afternoon interested in Ukraine and having a clear notion of solidarity with us. And I would be, of course, ready and happy to take a couple of questions. Many, many thanks. It was great to see every one of you here. And it was indeed an honor, also for me personally, to speak here in Princeton, having such a great audience. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and it was an honor for us to hear you like this and so candidly speaking about one of the big problems your country faces or has faced now in the last couple of months only. As it behooves Princeton, the floor is open, and I would especially invite my young colleagues and those who have a serious question, less than a political statement. I would invite you to come to the microphones. And before I do so and give you the floor, I would like to warmly welcome His Excellency the Ambassador of Ukraine and His Excellency the Deputy Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States. I would also like to express my personal delight to be able to welcome His Excellency the Ambassador of Austria to the United Nations and the Security Council, Madam Civic. And I'm very pleased for once to welcome my own wife to one of these official events. Okay, and now the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming today. So despite Gazprom's decision to cut gas supplies to Ukraine, the effect has been far less severe, obviously, because of the summer months. But now that summer is ending and winter is coming soon, I wonder, is there a plan for Ukraine's short-term energy security, and is there a long-term plan in mind that the Ukrainian government has for securing its energy independence?
Would you mind if we collect two questions together? Fine, yeah. Madame, mademoiselle.
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm a sophomore at Princeton. And what do you think are some actions that the U.S.
Okay, now the floor is yours.
It's also the point for the US now. After great developments on shale gas, how can you help Europe to be energy independent? Now, the European Union is getting approximately 35% of its gas supplies from Russia. So the EU is perfectly dependent on Russia, and it's one of the critical sources of influence on EU policy. What is interesting, we are now, after all years of difficult dependence upon Russia, we now are not buying any gas. It's actually a very interesting development which is taking place now. We have reverse flows of gas from the EU, buying gas. Can you imagine from Germany, which is far cheaper than Russian gas? And it's about the whole idea of energy independence. It's about links. It's about diversification of sources of supply and route of supply. And if you are independent, no one can threat you, no one can influence you in this way. And it's exactly the way forward for Europe. And there is an oil. There is a market for oil in the world. And many of you follow oil prices, the shares in New York. But there is no market for gas, not yet, in Europe. So the next step would be to build up this market, to get more LNG supplies, and hopefully to allow shale gas supplies to Europe from US. And US is perfectly able now, running great access in gas extraction, to provide more for energy security for Ukraine and for the whole Europe. And second point, what should the US now deliver for Ukraine? It's about three very simple things. One is political solidarity, which also means for me to arrange the whole civilized world speaking with one voice, keeping pressure on Russia, if needed, imposing sanctions, if needed, trying to put more pressure to get the real de-escalation in Donetsk and Lugansk. Secondly, to do more for our security, also in the sense of providing different military assistance, training, advice, which is important for our military forces to be able to defend ourselves. And third point, to provide more assistance for reforms in Ukraine, to be able to progress, to improve ourselves in such spheres as anti-corruption, rule of law, and economic reforms. It sounds probably a bit simpler that it could be done, but it's the only way forward. And also under crisis, we have to be fully committed to reforms. We have to be fully committed to the ways of how to combat corruption and how to be successful with different reforms on the ground. It's just 1, 2, 3, which exactly the ways of assisting Ukraine, but not only Ukraine, but also the whole neighborhood, including Moldova, Georgia, any country which has the European vocation and which are punished for their European vocation. Okay.
Jeff Laurenti, a Broker Down alumnus of the Wilson School and fan of Wolfgang. Minister Clinton, thank you for your exposition. You know, beginning of the last century, Porfirio Diaz famously remarked, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so near to the United States." And that appears to be much of Ukraine's problem. I don't know how far from God, but certainly much to Russia. Yet till last year's events, it seemed that most Ukrainians had some feeling of affinity or kinship or positive feelings towards Russia that you wouldn't have found in Poland or other places, the former Eastern Europe. But clearly, as the data you cited, even on the very provocative question of NATO, shows that the past 10 months have transformed Ukrainian public opinion, at least ethnic Ukrainian public opinion. What are the numbers on the EU by contrast to NATO? What, in the other half of Ukrainians, what is their problem still with wanting a military kind of tie to the West? And if the heavily Russian concentrations in the East and in Crimea had been what had been holding Ukraine back from its European vocation, is there not a silver lining in those heavily Russian areas having their own separate kind of entity so they're kept from holding back where Ukrainians want to be, want to go?
No, it's not a problem, actually.
He actually speaks Russian.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just wondering if you think that when I watch the news and read the news, it does not seem that Putin feels threatened by these sanctions. You know, the ruble is sinking, and there just seems like there's no reaction from Moscow. Is that really the case, or do you think that that's just posturing?
Okay.
Good evening. My name's Sam Robb. I'm a freshman here at Princeton. The natural gas question really prompted my mind because I did a little research on it, and I'm very optimistic about it. But I know that one of the problems is, you know, the U.S. has the gas and whatnot, but the infrastructure in Europe itself, I would just be curious, you know, how long do you estimate till gas could flow freely from the U.S. To Ukraine and the rest of the EU, you know, to make, you know, add towards that energy independence? Thank you.
Okay. Central Ukraine and the Eastern Ukraine. The whole idea, the whole Russian strategy around Ukraine is not just about Donetsk and Lugansk or the Crimea. You know, why does Russia need two areas where the Soviet-style heavy industry is really prevailing? And, you know, two areas which actually live on subventions, you know, from the Ukrainian budget. Why I'm so sure that the central Ukraine or other parts of eastern Ukraine will be a really difficult challenge for Russian troops if they decide to go in, as in the case in Donetsk and Lugansk. And I would base myself actually not on my subject perception, but on different opinion polls. Even in Donetsk and Lugansk, before the conflict, no, it was just up to 20%, you know, from the whole population who could have imagined joining Russia, even virtually or theoretically. It was 5 or 10%, you know, especially older people are staying under Russian propaganda. And if you watch Russian channels, and we Ukrainians normally presented there as fascists, you know, it's a Russian way of seeing us. But even now, the mood also in Donetsk and Lugansk has been changing because the people are totally fed up on the terrorists, browsing around, killing people. And also, if you see Crimea, the mood also, you know, has been changing quite considerably because many people simply got the point about living in a kind of autocracy comparing to democracy under clear umbrella of security forces. And I'll give you just one example, not talking for, you know, for half an hour about that. 400 prisoners in the Crimea sent a letter to our ombudswoman. It's, you know, just the whole prison in Crimea with the clear request to be transferred to Ukraine. Not just liberated from prison, but they simply don't want to stay in a prison, yes, now in Crimea in Russia. Even the prisoners, 400 prisoners, the whole prison, it's not just, you know, Ukrainian speaking people or Crimean Tatars. And in a couple of days in New York, I will speak with the leader of Crimean Tatars, Mustafa Djemilov, about the real situation with the Crimean Tatars, who are now fully prohibited, or, you know, partly prohibited from exercising their religion, from exercising their human rights. So it's exactly the reason why the mood has been changing and why I'm so sure that in a kind of perspective, I would not speculate, you know, but in a kind of perspective, we will come back to the Crimea and the people in Donetsk, Lugansk will get the point about Ukraine. And it's the key point that Ukrainians' reforms should be a real success. And it's exactly the point why Russia, and especially Putin, is so afraid of Ukrainian becoming a success. As a real success, and the last country in Europe also wrapping up the whole European project. So the whole Europe becoming democratic and independent. You know, the point about Russia, EU, and you know, the East as a area heavily dependent on Russia. They are not heavily dependent on Russia. There are a lot of Russian speakers there, but for me, playing up Russian against Ukrainian, it was always a kind of artificial style of Russia trying to divide us Ukrainians. You know, see the point of any country. You know, I live in Kiev practically for the whole life, you know, of my life. I have some friends, you know, Ukrainian-speaking friends. I have some Russian-speaking friends. I don't have any problem to talk to anyone in Ukrainian or in Russian. And it's exactly, you know, all my friends and all my colleagues. And it's not a dividing issue. It's actually a kind of asset if you are able to speak 2, 3, 5 languages, especially in Europe. Here, you know, it's about probably English, Spanish. I would like to be politically correct here. But in Ukraine, it's probably about Ukrainian, Russian, Polish. It's about English, you know, it's about German. It's fine. Practically all of my friends can speak 3, 4, 5 languages, and we're fine. In Russian, many people speak only Russian. Is there a real asset? It's actually what limits yourself to your very limited view from the point you are there. So, but the point on the EU, if you see the latest opinion polls, it's at least 70% in every part of Ukraine, including east of Ukraine, including southern of Ukraine, who are clearly for the European way of Ukraine. And it's also, you know, getting a kind of interesting development for older people. A couple of years ago, many older people were still nostalgic on the Soviet Union. It's not the case anymore. It's a completely different case. Sanctions. You know, sanctions are not there to ruin the Russian economy. It's not our goal. Sanctions are there to keep pressure on someone to go the way of political settlement, to withdraw the Russian troops and Russian heavy weaponry from Ukraine, to close down the border, because everything which is getting into Ukraine is getting from Russia. And because I actually studied in Russia in perestroika times, were great times. I still have a couple of friends in Russia. I'll give you also one example. There are different recruiting centers for mercenaries, which are, you know, greatly paid and, you know, trained, and after that sent into Ukraine. So I asked one of my friends, you know, through Skype communication, to call one of recruiting center in Russia, because they would not, you know, take it on the call actually if they see Ukrainian mobile number. He called such a recruiting center and said, "Look, I'm a great guy. I'm a former paratrooper. I would like to fight in Ukraine. How can we arrange all such of stuff?" They said, "Fine. If you don't need a special training, you could come for a week in Rostov, in Russian city, and after that you will be sent to Ukraine and will be paid $250 a day." You know, not bad actually, you know, especially for Russia. You know, it's just to give you a feeling of how it functions. So it's not about just sanctions. It's about clear way how we reach political settlement. And we are ready from our side to provide more decentralization to every region in Ukraine, to provide more freedom, but also more responsibility to every community, to give every community the right to define what language should be spoken. It could be Ukrainian, Russian, both languages. It could be Hungarian in the Western Ukraine. For me, it does not matter. You know, the people in every community should decide what language should be spoken. It's not about, you know, the central power in Kyiv to decide. It's about greater share of taxes, you know, to remain there. But it's about a clear way forward for united and democratic Ukraine. And gas, you know, gas is purely a political issue. It's not an economic issue, not at all. There is no market for gas, and gas is considered in Russia as a kind of political weapon. And we are from our side. We want to be independent from any sort of energy or any kind of pressure. So we are ready to buy gas from every source, also from the US probably, but on the basis of market price and on the basis of legal and valid contracts. It's as simple as that. And at the end of the day, it's about energy market, it's about liberalized energy market, and it's about every economy enjoying the right to buy and sell gas on the basis of economic substance and economic logic, and not any sort of political threats. And it will come the same way for other countries on the Soviet post space, you know, Moldova, Georgia, any sort of country. And it will become so for every country in Europe. And it will be exactly the moment of how the EU could come out of this energy dependence from Russia. And it's exactly our way forward. And my last point, we will be perfectly able to overcome this winter without Russian gas. We have already no Russian gas. It will be, of course, difficult, but it's exactly the price we have to pay. We are ready to sacrifice, but we are ready to go into deeper energy saving. We have our own gas. We have gas deliverers from Europe. But it's about our economy. It's about shaping it up for the future. But it's about clear idea, again, of being energy independent.
Let me switch roles for a moment and jump out from my role as chair and ask you a question, sir. The conflict in the Ukraine was baffling for many a strategic analyst because of the uniqueness of some of the tools which were employed and which Europe is confronted now by, and for which Europe, neither Europe, nor neutral Europe, nor NATO Europe, has been prepared for. Number one, ghost warriors. Many of them. Some would say 1, 2, 3 divisions operating on the level of brigades and operating on the level of independent small teams, 3+3 with satellite communication. Number two, the indirect information and cyber war. Using lies, distortion, manipulation, misrepresentation from reality to a degree for which no one in Europe was prepared, and first nobody really did believe. To trolls, as I learned from my young ones, all these sort of interesting internet operations. And number three, something else. Modern Trojan horses in the form of Trojan horses. I'm sorry, that's my Viennese English. In the form of an enumeration of white-painted trucks. And those trucks seem to be on their route, coincidentally, always, specifically, whenever there is a major diplomatic development. First one, 280 trucks moving into Ukrainian territory around the 28th of August with a potential tonnage of more than 5,200 tons. But to the surprise of OSCE and everybody else, we're only transporting 1,800 tons. So the question was, what in the world are you doing? They moved in, and then suddenly some of them disappeared. And then men without distinctions, military distinctions, walked back out along them and said, don't you open the truck to check on the border. That was 5 weeks ago. We had a similar event 3 weeks ago, and we are just on the verge, or 2 weeks ago, when there was the EU summit, and we are just on the verge to see a third of those trucks, groups, now with 180. And they apparently drive back out with industrial products, machinery, and other stuff, which can be useful in other areas. But my question is, for you perhaps now surprisingly different one. Why are there no columns of trucks to help the people coming from the west of the Ukraine to the east? What would you tell us is specifically the undertaking of the Kiev government now to foster reconciliation, to help reconstruction, and to bring materials and badly needed products into the East, which will otherwise receive that all from its eastern neighbor?
The first point, we are talking about, we don't have the clear bit of terminology for that. We are talking about hybrid wars, anything like that. We have Russian troops on our territory without any sort of labels, more and more of them. We have mercenaries, we have everything, we have heavy weaponry. And it's difficult to understand here. Imagine, the US Rangers caught, 10 paratroopers here around Princeton, and they appear to be, I have to be politically correct, paratroopers from the neighboring countries. And after that, you got the answer, they lost the way somehow. It was exactly, the situation in Ukraine. Hundreds of tanks trying to cross the border overnight, any sort of heavy weaponry, including anti-air missile. The whole idea how to counter this development, and it should be exactly a real concern for everyone, because it's now about clear idea how to destabilize neighboring country with a new kind of tactic and strategy. And within any sort of toolbox, we don't have an answer. OSCE, no. NATO, probably for NATO countries, but not for neighboring countries. So what is the toolbox? We have to address the problem here. Cyber war, well, a clear point, but a very simple example for our Ministry of Foreign Affairs staff, our websites, our accounts in social networks. We have attacks, breaches, and any sort of operations practically every day. We have disruptions from hackers all over the world. It's exactly the way we live in, and we have to be prepared. It's exactly the same for Baltic states, for Poland. So the NATO membership is not a real barrier for that. What is the answer? For you, for us, it's exactly a common strategy on how to counter cyber attacks. The so-called humanitarian convoys you've mentioned, great issue. We provided any sort of humanitarian assistance for Donetsk and Lugansk, but we are not able to bring it into the city because of Russian instructions not to accept such an assistance, and it's exactly a kind of PR exercise back in Russia, saying, no Ukrainian assistance because it's, hostile to you. But, coming to your question about how we can bring peace in Donetsk and Lugansk. We have a very clear plan for that. And we have actually three main dimensions. One is de-escalation, ceasefire, security zones. Second, humanitarian dimension, the whole idea to restore the disrupted infrastructure, because what the terrorists have been doing on the ground, they've been trying to disrupt electricity networks, gas supply, water supply. Thirdly, how to restore the economy, how to make the economy functioning, how to provide job programs for Donetsk and Lugansk. It's all already in the plan, also with the Western assistance, with the EU assistance, trying to build special trust fund for Donetsk and Lugansk. But it's also about third dimension, the clear idea of decentralization, the clear idea of providing special status, the most, providing the people there more freedom and more responsibility, more economic powers, especially at the level of communities and districts. It's even going so far as liberating the people from criminal investigation in the case they have not committed capital crimes. Because we simply can't liberate the people who were engaged in killings, in taking hostages, who shot down the Malaysian airplane from criminal responsibility. It's not just a point of politics. It's the point of sticking to the whole moral ground. But it's about 1, 2, 3. It's about a very clear, structured, and shaped peace plan, but it's about political will. Because our former president, Mr. Kuchma, told in one speech, it's just about two who have a real influence and who on the decision whether to bring peace back to Lugansk. It's about God, and it's about Russian President Mr. Putin. I am a former communist, he said, so I don't believe in God. So it's just about Mr. Putin. And it's exactly the point. It's about Russian strategy, and it's about political will on the Russian side. From our side, we are ready to do the utmost to bring, the law and order back, but not to let Donetsk and Lugansk to become another frozen conflict. And now we need a clear commitment also from the Russian side. And Russia, unfortunately, sees that as a big geopolitical conflict, also influencing the Russian internal policy and playing emotions and nationalistic stance back in Russia. And it's exactly the problem.
Professor Weisinger.
Yeah, my name is Mark Beisinger. I'm a specialist actually on post-Soviet politics, including Russian imperialism as well. So, and on nationalities issues in former Soviet Union. My question has to do with what you just mentioned, and that is the Russian side. I'm certain that Ukraine has the will to want to settle this conflict, but I'm not certain that Russia does. And I wonder if you could speculate a little bit about what would make Russia want to settle this conflict. Because it's not evident that there is a will on the Russian side at this point in time to settle for it, or what would Russia settle for that they would find acceptable? Next.
Thank you. Mr. Mike Schoenleber.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Foreign Minister. I have a lot of faith in God, and I have faith in the American people. for the time being, I don't have too much faith in the government of the United States. And so I would say that I will pray for the people of Ukraine, and I would ask, what is it possible for the American people, and for that matter, the people of Europe, to do to support the people of Ukraine over the next couple of difficult months?
Hi, my name is Ravi. I'm an exchange student here at Princeton from the University of Cambridge in the UK. So you spoke about the association agreement, and I was just wondering when you think that the association agreement will be ratified by EU member states. I mean, Germany has said that it may be able to get it through by summer of 2015. Is this something that you think is realistic? Thank you.
My name is Carlo Brenner, and I'm coming from the mission of Liechtenstein to the United Nations. Thank you for the possibility of being here. And my question is about a possible way out for Ukraine. If you consider as a possibility to have a Ukraine as a neutral country, because for Russia, clearly the most important thing is the geopolitical sphere of influence that they have on Ukraine. So if a possible way out can be having Ukraine as a country that deals both with Russia and the EU and the USA, but without falling in the sphere of influence of either one of the sides. Thank you very much.
Okay. First point, for me, the answer is pretty clear. It's not a point of speculation. Russia actually wants a clear leverage on Ukrainian politics, a clear way how to prevent the EU membership of Ukraine, how to prevent a kind of security umbrella, transatlantic security umbrella for Ukraine, how to leave the whole Ukrainian space in and around for the Russian business to be operative there, and actually to keep Ukraine in the Russian sphere of influence. The only problem here is that, Russia is not the former Soviet Union in the sense of available resources. Also not a sort of uniting force in the sense of all the Russian Empire. And for us, it's not about a kind of compromise on two key issues, and I already mentioned both of them. It's about united Ukraine, democratic Ukraine, and it's about European way of Ukraine. All other issues could be creatively discussed with anyone, but on these two issues, if you ask the Ukrainian society, if you feel the mood in Ukrainian society, there could be no compromise because Ukrainians are fully ready to sacrifice anything for that. And it's exactly the point which is so difficult, not just for Russia, but for the Russian authorities. And without the clear and committed position of the United States and the European Union, because it's also a kind of geopolitical conflict in the Russian eyes, we can't reach a real settlement. And it's exactly the point why we are really count on US and the European Union. The point about what is possible, for the people of Ukraine there, and how it could be what kind of support is critical for us from the people. You know, any kind of politics is possible only on the basis of people-to-people links. For me, you know, the whole umbrella of political, of economic relations, it's only possible if the people have a real touch. And for me, you know, it's about school partnerships, it's about students, you know, exchange, it's about different partnerships, any sort of network of partnership which should work. And it's about coming to Ukraine, it's about trying to give something for the real partnership with Ukraine. It's not just about politics. It's not about trying to press, you know, your government or European government there. Of course, it's really important track. But it's about having Ukraine as a kind of issue, of real priority issue for every one of you. Because you have a lot of countries, lots of conflicts, lots of ideas.